We never set a growth goal. We never focused on growth, which people find very unusual. We focused on being as good as we could possibly be. And guess what happened? 20% compounded annual growth over 20 years. So like you don't achieve it by looking at it. You sort of achieve it by looking at the things that matter more, and then, look at that. It happened. Source of fulfillment for Adams and a force for good in our communities and for our clients. And that source of fulfillment, that's like social connection, the chance to master your profession, to learn, to grow, to solve problems together, to get affirmation, like a whole host of things that provide, I think, a fulfilling way to spend half your adult waking hours. And the idea that you could exchange half your adult waking hours merely for money seemed ridiculous.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, John Moncrief, and my guest today is Carl Erickson. Now, Carl is a former professor turned accidental founder. He took a company called Atomic Object and basically built it from the ashes of a failed startup into one of the most admired employee-owned software companies in the country. Now, this isn't an ESOP or an EOT. This is a form of direct ownership. There's 80 of the 110 employees in the company are actual members of the LLC, which is something really different from what we typically talk about. And they all have shares in the company. So Carl talks about how he broke free from academia, the lessons he took from his early startup failure, and how he built a business that's grounded in the ideas of extreme programming, strong values, and a long-term vision. And he took those ideas from extreme programming, like pair programming, to a whole new level where the atoms, as he affectionately refers to the people within the organization, his employees, work side by side, right up to the level of CEO. So he's got two CEOs who essentially pair up. And in this episode, we dig into what it takes to build a company with staying power, including Atomic's unconventional ownership structure, Carl's approach to culture, and why he believes in creating more than just wealth for founders. So if you've ever wondered what it takes to create a business or to build a business that is an enduring business that can last beyond your lifetime and 100 years into the future, then this episode's ready for you. Carl, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today. And yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you.
So tell me, just to give the audience some context, if we go back to how Atomic came into existence. Mm-hmm. I've heard the story of how you sort of raised this business from the ashes of a startup and came from an academic kind of background. And maybe I've got some of this right or wrong, but I'm really keen to understand or really curious about how you came to take the reins of what is now Atomic and build it into what it is.
Yeah. So, John, I got a PhD because I love to learn, and school is a fun place to hang out. And as a computer science, computer engineering major, you can do that and not go into debt. And just before I should have finished my doctoral dissertation, my mom died quite young, unexpectedly. And it had a big impact on me, cost me a year of time to finish my PhD. And it also inspired me to look for an academic job after I finished, which I hadn't necessarily been planning on, and specifically a teaching job. So I only looked at two colleges because I was where we were living in Grand Rapids, Michigan, turned out to be a great place to live. And my brother had moved here and become like our new hometown. And so I looked at two schools. I took the choice of the one that I thought honored teaching and knew what they were all about. That's Grand Valley State University. And that was an awesome job for 10 years. I loved the university. I liked putting on the silly academic regalia for convocation in the fall and graduation, the pomp and the circumstance. Like, I love teaching. Classroom environment is cool. Doing the whole research projects with special students was great. But there's a downside to that job, and that is that a lot of the people who have those jobs really aren't people who want to rock the boat. They like the status quo. They just want to keep things the way they are. And, that's probably why universities have been around for 1,000 years, right? Very conservative organizations. That wasn't a good match for my personality. So on my first sabbatical, 1997, 98. We spent it in Sweden. I did a little bit of teaching, a little bit of research. We did a lot of traveling. It was a great experience with our two little kids. And came home and sort of like realized, yeah, this isn't going to last for me. And so I jumped on a chance to join a startup in 1999 that a former student was a part of out of Austin, Texas. And that startup was funded by basically one wealthy guy who had some ideas and came out of the power industry. And since in 1999, it was tough to hire engineers in Austin, Texas. So my friend Jim convinced me to build the engineering team in Grand Rapids. And I did
Okay.
that, and I was having a ball. And we were pioneers in what was called extreme programming back then,
Yeah.
what's known as agile software development today. So we were learning a lot, and we were getting really great traction with that, and we were writing awesome software. And this software, man, it was so great, it was going to change the world, only no one ever used it. And it was the classic mistake of, designing in a vacuum with everybody in mind, but nobody in mind. And so when it came time to close the second round of financing, they failed to do that. And then that's July of 2001. So
Straight into
the
the, yeah.
startup just went away, poof, gone.
Wow.
And it's the best failure I've ever been a part of because it got me out of the university, broke the golden handcuffs. It also gave me a super valuable lesson on how product development should not be done, and put the people who around me, another former student, and then three interns, into a team. And so I took that team, and instead of going back to the university, which I'm sure I would have gotten my job back, I was good at that job. I didn't even think of doing that, and we formed Atomic out of what remained of that startup, so like the office and some furniture and the people. And then we did a 180-degree pivot, and instead of being a product company, we became a services company, and we took our development skills and went looking for clients who had software problems to solve, which was relatively easy in the sense that I'd been teaching in the community for 10 years in the grad program. And that's a terminal master's, so that everybody had a job in the community. So I knew a bunch of companies locally, and I built up a good reputation and some trust there. So landed a critical first project, built the end-of-line roll tester for a company that, end-of-line roll testers go into automotive assembly plants,
Yeah.
and they're the machine that does like the final checkout of a car before it leaves the
As they come out.
factory.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Super important job there. Then they trusted us to build the client for that, strategic project.
So this is coming straight out of kind of the whole internet bubble at burst. We've just come out of that, right? Obviously, that next round of funding didn't happen,
Yeah.
and you pick up the Grand Rapids office really and pivot the business and focus on software development for a very specific niche. By the sounds of things, to start with, that first project.
Oh, no, not at all.
Was okay.
We specialized in the kind of software that people were willing to pay us to develop.
Okay.
Which is to say we didn't specialize. Now, we just happened to pick up this job, but that was the brilliant part of it is we had a really good process. This extreme programming stuff was working great for us, and we had smart, flexible people. And so whatever job we could find, which was to say I could find, I had confidence that we could solve that problem, which is one of the great benefits of my partner, Bill. Bill Bereza was a former student of mine, one of the best software developers I've ever known. And, with him and a small team and my own efforts, I had a lot of confidence to go out and convince people that we could solve their problem.
Now, I'm quite interested how you've evolved, or during this time, you evolved this idea of extreme programming, because essentially what you're doing is partnering up to two developers, right? And they're kind of working, one's looking over the other one's shoulder and kind of picking up the mistakes. But you took this further, right? You brought this into the business beyond just programming, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So the that's interesting.
No idea what's going on. Maybe it's got something to do. Interesting.
Yeah. So extreme programming became known to the world when a book was published by the guy who, I guess, invented it, you could say. I mean, there are quite a few influences there, but you know, he wrote the book, and so it started to become known. I was actually aware of it in the university, but I also didn't have a whole lot of motivation in the university because, like, this is one of the problems with the university. It's really tough to simulate a realistic software environment, and so you end up doing, you know, you end up teaching programming in a vacuum and then teaching the system stuff. And
Yeah.
like the real world software development tools and techniques are hard to use in a classroom setting. And I had been bothered by this for a while, which this being like, here I am teaching these, you know, 18 to 21-year-olds something that's very applied that they're going to make their living off of. I had not, in fact, ever made my living that way. And so I brought a lot of academics to the table, but no practical industrial experience. So here was my chance to like build software that people were going to use. And I knew that the way we taught software engineering was based on like 40-year-old ideas that came out of the space program and involved, you know, thousands of people working on a project where step one is build hardware and then
Yeah.
build a compiler and then build software. Like, just the whole structure of it didn't make sense for what most programming in the business world was. And that's where extreme programming got me very excited. I read the book, it was an epiphany. Like, this makes so much sense. We're going to try this. So we tried it, we learned it, we got good at it, we extended some of the boundaries on it, especially in the testing area. And it's 13 practices. So pair programming, what you were describing, two people, one computer, not over the shoulder, but shoulder to shoulder, side
Sure.
by
Okay.
side. One person with hands on keyboard, conversation back and forth. How should we test this? What are we doing? What's the API for that? What's the picture here? All that stuff. That's a very interesting experience. It's very exhilarating because if we're pair programming, and we kind of look like we are right here, right now, if we're pair programming, the only thing that's going to stop the two of us as a pair is what both you don't know and I don't know. So the intersection of
Gotcha.
our ignorance is a lot smaller
Okay.
than my ignorance or your ignorance. So you feel like you go very quickly. You get a lot of work done. Now you got two people sitting there, so it's a good thing that you have some productivity and get work done. But there's another thing that comes out of it, which is the quality is different. So that's very exciting, but very odd. Like, it was a hard thing to sell because, you know, back in those days, the client heard pair programming. They're like, so you mean you're going to charge me for two people when you're only
Mm.
doing one person's worth of work? So I had a lot of explaining to do in that regard. But there's other things too. There were principles about working in short sprints, like 1 week, 2 week sprints, data-driven project management, actually measuring how much you have done based versus the estimate, and then plotting that out and predicting where you're going to finish. Not designing anything you don't need. So don't, these are a real risk and a temptation of software developers is designing very elegant systems when you don't really
Mm.
know well enough the problem. And so you can spend a lot of time coming up with a very generic design when you might not ever need it. So there's a principle called you're not Yagni. You're not going to need it, probably.
Okay.
So don't do it until you need it. So anyway, a whole bunch of stuff like that was going on. And I think these extreme programming principles had an impact on our culture, like how we operated as a team and as a company. To this day, Atomic is very pair oriented. Our managing partners in the 4 offices are always in pairs, 2 people, because it's a tough job. We have co-CEOs. Our pair programming probably isn't as consistent as it once was. I don't know for sure, but I just sort of get that impression wandering through offices occasionally. But it's still an important practice.
I mean, if I think back to working with programmers myself in the past, some of the characters can be pretty difficult. So when you come down to pair programming, I imagine culture is really important. I think I had quite a few prima donnas. I mean, I was kind of 97, 98, 99 into the bubble it burst for us as well. And I remember some interesting challenges, but you've taken this right to the CEO level. And I guess that same idea of working shoulder to shoulder, there's that intersection where they both don't know something is obviously a much
Very
smaller point.
valuable.
But culture has to be critical to get this right, I guess.
Yeah, and because we had the luxury of starting from scratch, I didn't have the extraordinary challenge of taking sort of a standard software development process and culture and then changing it to this. We built it from the
Mm.
ground up with these ideas in mind. And you're right, it's not for everybody. Like, so we had to be super careful about our hiring process to make sure that we were hiring people who didn't want to like own their own code and like keep everybody else out, and or not have other opinions about how software should be built as part of it. So no cowboys. And you just learn how to be good at hiring to match the culture. And what's so fascinating to me is I don't think I even used the word culture until like 2008. We got going in 2001. We uh, opened our bank account actually on September 11th, 2001, because we went and gave blood and then had lunch. And the only thing you could do, you weren't going to work. So we just
Yeah.
opened a bank
Wow.
account for the company. Um, the
Wow.
idea that culture is important is easy to say in hindsight, but I didn't think about it that way. I just built the company I wanted to work for. So
Because you've
Atomic is wrapped up around my personality and my values, and
gotcha.
that's mostly
Okay.
good. That it turned out to be mostly good. There's some downsides to it too. I'm, for example, too likely to finish a problem, solve a thing, get something done, and not stop to celebrate that and move on to the next problem to solve. And I think the company inherited got that from me, and we have to work against that. So, for better and for
Yeah.
worse, companies are like their founders.
Yeah, that's true. They kind of inherit those characteristics from the founders. But I mean, you were saying earlier, um, you didn't really get the opportunity to test what you were doing in the academic environment in the real world, but you came out of that academic environment, picked up this company, and actually built something. I mean, we were talking before we started that I think Clutch rated as one of the top software companies in the world. Um, you kind of went into your lab almost and took what you couldn't do in the academic world and built something quite beautiful.
Yeah,
And
that's
yeah,
true. That's an interesting way to look at it. And it was fun because I, 3 degrees, and I don't know, didn't take a single business course, didn't know how to do accounting,
yeah.
didn't know any of that stuff. I'd barely used a spreadsheet at the time. And so all of those businessy tools and business ideas were all new to me. And on the other hand, like I am an academic and I have a notion that there's a right way to do things, and experts have thought this through, and like you should learn the right way. So there's a little tension there between like, okay, I don't know squat about business, but I think I should do things the right way. So I guess I have to learn. But at the same time, like some of what I was learning did not align with my own personal values. And thank heavens, I trusted my own values and ignored what I didn't like. So I think Atomic today still has things that are culturally unusual, like our whole ownership program is quite unusual. A direct form of ownership where 80 of the 110 people in the company are members of the same LLC and have shares in the company, for instance.
Was that something you envisaged from the beginning, or something that as time evolved, you decided that this is how you wanted to structure the business?
I did not think of it at the beginning, and what became apparent as we worked together, and we codified our values in probably like 2006 or seven, when a visiting consultant and friend from the extreme programming community um, was in town to do some training for us when we were trying to figure out, okay, we've got this really tight engineering culture. How do we bring design into it? And he was helping us there. And he's a friend, and he at some point in this training for us, he he came over to me and said, Carl, there's like some really distinct things here that you guys believe in and expect, and you should really codify that. Like you have values. And I hadn't thought about it before. So I spent a little bit of time and I came up with four values that are still there today. And eventually we added two more. But super important, John, it was not me saying this is like aspirational values. This is what I want
Yeah.
the company to be. It was what I saw in the way people behaved. So I just wrote them down and gave them crafty names. And as a
You
result
came
of
up with
that,
the little pins, right? Was that further down the
yeah,
line?
the little pins that we've handed out at Small Giants
Yeah.
Summit have our values on it. Yep.
Sorry, I
So
interrupted you as a result of that.
Well, so one of those, two of those values that are important are give a shit. That's pretty much
Yeah.
everyone's favorite, just because of the word. And everyone knows what it's like to work with people who don't care, right? That's miserable. So that's a very important one for us. But then there's another one called own it. And own it is how you put your give a shit into action. So I could care deeply, but if I don't take any action, I'm not really owning it. And so as I look around in 2007, 2008, I'm like, holy moly, these folks, they act like they own the place. And that's awesome. We have this ownership culture that has nothing to do with the legal or the shares or anything. It's incumbent upon me as the founder to, in my way of owning it, to make sure that they actually do own the place. And it's like,
Gotcha.
oh, employee ownership. That's how
Yeah.
that works. So that's what started us down that road.
So it actually kind of
Oh,
came from the values,
yeah,
from give a shit and own it. And I can remember
yeah.
coming back with those from a Small Giants event with those little buttons and walking in and having a conversation with Sina, my partner, and she was looking at them and she said, "I love that." And I think it was those two, give a shit and get it done. And she was working for Diageo, the alcohol company at the time, put the pins on, went to work with them, and it was
Nice.
kind of her values as well. Get it done. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
remember
also
those.
it's very much about who I am as well, in the sense that, just the idea that one person, or in this case, my partner Bill and I, could own the whole company and um, be the beneficiaries of the value that was being created. I mean, we obviously paid people and had benefits and all that kind of stuff. And I put a profit sharing scheme into place super early, 2003, maybe 2004. 25% of our profit every quarter goes to everybody in the company. So that was already in place. And then the next step was, yes, but they should also be owners, and we'll be stronger together. Plus, when you think about it, if you want the company to last indefinitely, or 100 years, which I think is a much more interesting way to say that, like, the ownership of the company needs to stay inside the company. Well, where can you vest that responsibility? Who better to put it with than the people who are working actively in the company to protect it? So that
Yes.
was the other element of it.
And ultimately, you landed up going down the ESOP route, correct? That
No, no, we
no.
didn't. And that's what's unusual, is we have this direct form of ownership. We're not an ESOP.
Ah,
So
got it.
ESOP is
Okay.
a retirement plan, a ERISA qualified retirement plan. I looked into it because, the mind share of ESOP in the employee ownership world is 90%. So when you
Yes.
say employee ownership, people just assume ESOP. But, there's employee ownership trusts now, and there's the direct form that I did. You could be a co-op. Like, there's a lot of things that, besides ESOPs. And ESOP was expensive even back then. It's just gotten worse. Plus, I'm thinking to myself, my 20 something employees, I think everybody but me was under 20, under 30, like, telling them that 40 years from now, when you retire, this will be really good financially for you, didn't seem super motivating. What I wanted to positively impact their lives every quarter that we did well together. So if we did well together and we had money to distribute,
There's a distribution.
and yeah, we didn't have
Yeah.
huge capital needs. So if we were operating well, and we were operating well, then we had money, and we distributed it via partly the 25% profit share. Um, the most interesting component of that profit share distribution is, half of it, roughly speaking, is what we always refer to as 1/n, where n is the number of people in the company. So everybody got the same share. Um, the ownership then had, the rest of the distributions, and getting them into positions of ownership then would be positively impacting their lives, saving for their kids' education, you know, doing a kitchen project, whatever it might be.
So what is the route into ownership for somebody at Atomic for an atom? How does an atom
So
come into owning?
Atoms are eligible at the first year anniversary to start buying shares through payroll deduction.
Okay.
A relatively small amount. I think the amount's $4,000 a year, at most. And that gave us a lot of breadth. That's where we got, 80 people. But the way that really transferred shares, what was me being the source and me selling my shares over time when people hit their 5th year anniversary.
Gotcha.
So we
Okay.
have had an offering round almost every year since 2009, which the first year. And so the people hitting that anniversary, or sometimes people um, who have been promoted from, say, designer or developer to a managing partner, the portion that we offer to people who are in those more strategic roles, the more higher responsibility roles, is a greater number of shares that they're eligible to buy if they want than somebody who's a designer or developer. And there's various levels like that.
And I'm
So,
curious, do they have to sell back into the business? Is that
oh yeah, because if you let
okay?
go your shares, you let go
Yeah.
of control eventually. So when
Okay.
people leave, and this has worked in and out quite smoothly over all these years. When you leave, the company has the right to buy the shares back, and always has, including with
And it,
me. Like I exited when I was ready to be done. Um, I still had 35% of the company, so I had gone from what would have been all of it down to 35% over that 15-ish years, or 13 years, I guess. So
okay.
the company basically, bought my shares back like every other shareholder who had left the company. And I, unlike every other shareholder who left the company, I financed my own exit by taking a down payment in a note.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's actually interesting because a lot of people say, oh my gosh, like, what happens if Atomic doesn't do well and they owe you this money? And aren't you nervous that you don't have any control? I got zero control. Um, and no, I'm not nervous, mostly because they're doing well. And I think the leadership of the company is in really good hands with Sean and Mike. They're stewarding what we built together, all good in that regard. And that's mostly where my confidence lies. But the other part of it is like, because I started in 2009 selling my shares to other atoms, Mary and I, diversified, so to speak, our family balance sheet.
Mm,
And so we were okay financially. And in the worst case, which I don't see happening, but in the worst case, Atomic goes away, we'll still be okay.
yeah.
So starting early helped.
But it's been more important to you to involve the people who've been involved in build, but involve the atoms who've been involved in
Yes.
creating Atomic together. And that's, I suppose, being part of sort of your purpose in a way is to help those folks to own something that is valuable.
Oh yeah,
How did you, yeah,
we've created an awful lot of wealth for non-founder employees, and
mm,
I'm super proud of that. And anything else would have just felt wrong. So that's where it's like, okay, I don't want to do what I think it would be wrong. I'm not going to just hold on to this. I don't want to. I don't want to maximize the economic return out of it. PE would be that route today.
yeah,
And so this employee ownership is going to be the way I go. It helps me because it's diversifying my investment portfolio, so to speak, out of this very thinly traded little stock called Atomic Object.
yeah.
And at the same time creates wealth for the people who help build the company.
How do you value it? Do you just do a valuation every year or?
So this is one of the unconventional things about, like, not when you don't know the right way, you just do things that make sense to you. And
Yeah,
so I went looking for like a year and a half as I was writing up the prospectus and thinking through the plan and consulting various helpers. I went looking for, like, what is the value of our company? And I was seeking the capital T truth on this question. And I collected like 12 different models. And then I figured out, oh, actually, what the company's worth is what I'm willing to sell it for, and somebody's willing to buy it for.
yeah.
So
Okay.
our valuation model, I built it myself. It's in a spreadsheet to this day. It's quite a spreadsheet now. But it's basically a financial buying model. It's a discounted cash flow model.
Okay. Got it. Um, I'm, I mean, you mentioned PE there. What happens if, because part of what you've talked about, at least before we started the show, is building a business that could endure for 100 years.
Yeah.
What happens if PE comes in now and makes that offer a very attractive offer to the folks who own the business at the moment.
So 80 folks own the business. They'd have to vote for doing that. But there's a much smaller number of people who, if their votes go that way, then the business could be acquired. So it doesn't require all 80 people to sign up. It's proportional to the share ownership. So it would probably be 4 or 5 people would need to make that
Yeah.
decision, starting with the co-CEOs. And there's nothing that prevents that. What makes it so that I don't think it'll happen is a very strong culture.
I was,
And
and values, I guess.
so
Culture and values.
exactly the values,
Yeah.
right? So, the CEO who would be willing to do that would face, I don't know, they'd have to leave Grand Rapids. They'd have to move out of town. It would be like such a violation of the expectation and of the goal, the long-standing 100-year goal. Yeah, that it would be really tough.
So that's all kind of baked into what Atomic is all about, is
Yeah.
those values, that culture, and this idea that we are building something bigger than ourselves that's going to endure for
Mhm.
over 100 years, and is going to help to, as our friend Eric Rieger puts it, kind of bridge the gap between this kind of wealth discrepancy, or the have not kind of thing, and sort of bridge that gap in a way. And the people who are leading that business have that kind of purpose in mind, I guess. This is
Yep.
what this
And
is all about.
so,
Beautiful.
so our co-CEOs today, one of them was the first intern for the company. So he goes back to the startup that failed out of Austin. He was my intern there. And so he was employee number one, basically, within Atomic. So long tenure. And then
Yeah.
the other one started with us in 2004 out of college. So he's also been there a very long time. Both of them have been instrumental in building and shaping and running the company. What will be very interesting to see is when those guys are ready to go on to something else, and they'll, if they have a promotion internally who's ready for that job, that person probably will have worked at Atomic for maybe 10 years, but like they won't be the OGs of Atomic. Like
Mhm.
those people are not going to be our next CEO because those people are our CEOs right now, right?
Yeah.
And so they'll probably have they'll have to at least consider a potential of an outside hire. And now you're bringing someone in who doesn't didn't grow up with that, so to speak. And I think then the temptation or the risk will be higher. But I also know that my co-CEOs are very savvy and they think about stuff like this. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all if, unlike me, where I could rely on the people who was succeeding me and I just trusted, I suspect they'll be able to put something into place that has a little more teeth. And
Mm.
I think that thing would probably be down the road, who knows when, but I think that would probably be something like an employee ownership trust.
Okay.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the way to really like lock in our think long-term value and our 100-year goal.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I wanted to go back to before I ask you about your own exit is, you're coming from a coaching background, and I was talking to you about this before, is that strategy is an important thing, and kind of thinking about what the overall strategy is for the business and then how we execute it. And it was interesting. I was talking to Patrick Teen long ago, who has the rhythm system, and he said to me, strategy is great and all that, but it sits over there on a shelf. We've got to get this execution part right, and this is so important. I'm curious about how you think about strategy, Carl, because you have a different way of thinking about it, and you sort of think about it as strategic principles, I think, rather than kind of a strategic plan or whatever. Curious about how you think about that.
Yeah, I suspect nowadays, because we have picked up some of the EOS stuff, that we have the vision traction organizer thing, but we never had that until recent times. And what we did have though is principles that we held dear. One of them comes right out of the small giants community, which is to be as good as we can possibly be and not not focus on a revenue or a headcount growth target. So I encapsulate that into the name of my blog called Great, Not Big. And we use that also as probably the most important principle, thinking about what it means to treat people well, be great in that regard, and do well by our clients, make sure their experience is a positive one, own the quality of the code we develop. Testing comes from that. Like there's so many ways in which we look at the way we do business and all the elements of our business and think, what's the best thing we can do and how can we get it better continuously?
Because the revenue and the profit
Instead
are
of saying
outputs, right? That's going to be the
precisely.
output of what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I never really heard until I met Tom Walter, I'd never heard someone, like tell such a compelling story about
Mm.
having been laser focused on the financial outcomes and then having this very interesting experience where it's a long story that it's not mine to tell, and I can't even tell it well, but basically he shifted entirely over to focusing on the people and supporting the people and the processes, and the financial outcomes just take care of themselves. And
Yeah,
similarly,
he says he doesn't even think about their financial outcome, right? Or at
yep,
the it just he knows it's going to take care of itself. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
similarly, like we never set a growth goal. We never focused on growth, which people find very unusual. We focused on being as good as we could possibly be. And guess what happened? 20% compounded annual growth over 20 years. So like you don't achieve it by looking at it. You sort of achieve it by looking at the things that matter more. And then, look at that. It happened.
Yeah.
Actually, it happens and it's a pain in the ass because growth wrecks your structure, whatever the structure is. At the time, you grow sufficiently, and then like, oh, the structure is creaking and groaning, and there's problems with it, and now we got to stop and restructure and think about like what has this growth done that we don't want to have happen, and how do we account for that, fix it.
I'm curious about how you thought about growth then. I mean, we sort of started off on strategy and strategic guidelines and not focusing on those outputs of revenue and profit and those sort of things. How did you think about how this business was going to grow?
There was a seminal inflection point. We were about 15 people, 20 people maybe at most, one office, Grand Rapids, and we were starting to feel some of those pains I'm describing of growth that growth brings. I
Yeah.
distinctly remember a conversation with one of our long-time developers who said to me at 15 people, it's like, Carl, I don't know if I can be friends with like more than 15 people, which was a beautiful expression of the culture, I thought, and also an interesting challenge. And so where I came down on that was, we were doing well. Have always been quite profitable and consistent financially, and we had happy customers, and we solved their problems, and we're an innovation engine for them. We don't have our own products, but we make what our customers use to be competitive in the world. So we're a very important part of the local ecosystem for businesses, and we treat
Mm.
people well. So they can learn, like all the mastery, autonomy, and purpose stuff for intrinsic motivation all lines up. So it's good. And there's other cities that don't have atomics and software development consultancies like ours. And so I felt kind of like maybe a moral obligation might be a little too strong, but not really. Like there should be more atomic in the world. There should be
Okay.
more opportunities for people to be atoms. There should be more good consultancies like ours to help clients and to innovate and use software effectively. And so after I thought about it that way, I'm like, okay, then I'm willing to suffer for that. And opening a second office was indeed suffering. It was very difficult, and we didn't do it well. Third office went much better, and well, there's been 5 and one failed. The first one failed. So number 2
Detroit
is
was
yeah,
yeah.
Detroit was the one that failed, and the other I think they're getting better and better. I think Raleigh
Okay.
is their most recent one, and I think they're doing really well.
It's funny, the
We've
chaps,
learned.
the folks at Raleigh reached out to me the other day as well. So keen to touch base with them, and told me about a great South African restaurant, which is just kind of, I guess, to the east of Asheville, maybe.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, coming from South Africa, um, yeah. So I definitely have to get together with them and perhaps get to that restaurant sometime. It'd be really interesting, really exciting.
That
So
leadership pair is a great
down
one.
there,
Former designer, former developer. They'd worked on many projects together, and they came together and asked told, I think is the right word actually. They told our co-CEOs, we want to open the next office. It was
okay.
like the perfect outcome.
So they based in Grand Rapids at the time, and then
Yeah,
they wanted to open in Raleigh, and they come to you and they say, okay, two of us are going down there. We're interested in setting this up, and okay, there's the conversation and the
yeah.
decision that's made, and those two Adams
They
go off down there. Okay,
yeah.
got it.
I think they evaluated
Brilliant.
cities, came and settled on Raleigh as
Okay,
have the right sort of mix of things that Atomic needs to succeed, including a really strong education system. And then they took, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 people from Grand Rapids to sort of seed the office with. So you ended up with all of the original people in Raleigh came out of Grand Rapids and knew the culture well and knew the processes and knew all the technical things there are to know, all that stuff.
so it's almost kind of seeding, spinning up there, spinning the culture up
Hmm.
in that region. And
Hmm.
does this go back to the team being 15 people? So almost when you kind of get to that 15 odd size, I don't know how many folks in Grand Rapids at the moment, but and a couple of folks kind of go off and are creating something somewhere else. So not a huge concept, but
Yeah. I don't remember my biology well enough. That's like cell mitosis or meiosis?
something like that. Yeah. I've got no idea. I didn't do well in biology.
Um, so, so we have 2 offices now that are way over 15. I mean, the
Okay.
15 thing was a little silly in the sense that the question was a good question, but we figured that one out. So I
Yeah.
think there are 45 or 50 people in Ann Arbor. It's probably
Okay.
40 to 45 people in Grand Rapids. And those offices seem to be healthy, happy places to work. So I think they
Love it.
figured it
Yeah.
out from there. But I don't personally think it could go much beyond that. I do think there is a limit.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, so you've exited the business. You've left the business, and I think we may have briefly touched on this while we were at Small Giants at the summit this year. But did you go through any kind of sort of depression, or have lost my sense of purpose, or anything like that, as somebody exiting a business, as a founder exiting a business? And how did you deal with it if you did?
Yeah, Bo Burlingham's other really important book, Finish Big, about
Mm,
people leaving the businesses they founded. Successful exits, according to Finish Big, have some characteristics. One of them is you get pulled out, you don't get pushed out.
yeah.
And I was pulled out by my interest in other things, which syncs up with me as a generalist, curious learner kind of person. And so I'd been doing a lot of things in the community, getting very involved in some nonprofits. And so I had other interests and I was feeling that pull. That's part of it that I think helped. I didn't have all my eggs in the basket of CEO. And I didn't even realize it at the time. And I was a little surprised that when I got to like really am all my shares are redeemed and I don't have a responsibility left, that I just felt this huge sense of relief. And I'd only been working part time as executive chairman for a couple of years, maybe 3 years at that point. So like I did taper off,
Okay.
and that probably helped too. But I was surprised by how much of a sense of responsibility I was still holding when I was finally and fully retired. That first month or so, quite the opposite of depression. It was just like euphoria, and I couldn't believe what it was like to have boring days. Reminded me of being a kid. And
Yeah.
you complain as a little kid about being bored. My mom did not like that one bit. You know,
I
find
remember
something to
those.
keep
Yeah.
yourself entertained, right? And so I had these delightful days where it's like, gosh, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I don't have anything on my calendar and I can continue to read this book I want or take the dogs for a walk or whatever I want to do. It was great. I have since, of course, filled in all sorts of things and I find all sorts of fun ways to spend my time mentoring young founders, sitting on boards, helping nonprofits creatively, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really great. So I got a lot of
Yeah.
what I call work in my life now after almost 2.5 years out. But for that initial part, I was very glad to find out that I don't have my identity tied up in being the CEO, and I
Yeah.
didn't miss it at all.
Do you think that was because you had been intentional about it and you had kind of been pulled out instead of being pushed out?
Yeah, and I never particularly enjoyed the power that that job
Mm.
gives you. Like I found it to be a hard thing
Yeah.
to manage and just a distasteful thing to deal with. I I wrote a blog post. I think the only blog post I've ever written that used the word fuck, and it was around having friends at work and like how stupid that is and how everyone says don't do it if you're the boss and et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. And the usage of the F word there was fuck that. Like I'm
Yeah.
gonna have friends because I built this thing for a whole bunch of reasons that have nothing to do with money. It has to do with, working together with people I like and having good social relationships in the company, all that stuff. And I sure as heck wasn't going to isolate myself from the upside of that, of the culture we had created, where there are good friends and relationships, and we enjoy hanging around each other and doing things together.
That's why we come together and create these kind of communities, these social kind of groups with a purpose. And that's what we're trying to do together. And that's where we're going. And we spend so much time with each other that
Yeah,
being friends is part of it. You want
yeah,
to work with the people you love and that you're friends with. And
yeah.
um,
I When I codified Atomic's purpose, this is many, many years after the start of the company. So this is not like me sitting down and thinking, what is the purpose of this company? That was completely off my radar. Purpose of the company at the time was I need a job. I want to do this cool stuff we're doing. I want to do it with these people right here.
with
And
cool
let's figure
people.
out how to
Yeah.
make that happen. Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
But when
Yeah.
I codified it later, I came up with sort of the shorthand version of Atomic's purpose is to be a source and a source of fulfillment for atoms and a force for good in our communities and for our clients. And that source of fulfillment, that's like social connection, the chance to master your profession, to learn to grow, to solve problems together, to get affirmation, like a whole host of things that provide, I think, a fulfilling way to spend half your adult waking hours.
Yeah.
And the idea that
Yeah.
you could exchange
Big.
exchange half your adult waking hours merely for money seemed ridiculous. Does seem
I get.
ridiculous.
I guess this kind of comes into my sort of last question for you is this podcast is the freedom experience, and I'm really curious about how you think about freedom, what freedom means to you. And I feel like there was something in what you were just saying now, just being able to do and create and do the things that you want to do. But what does freedom mean to you, Carl?
Today, it means flexibility
Yeah.
and being able to pursue without any constraint on needing to make money what I feel like doing, what I'm curious about. I spend a lot of time reading. I had this conversion from lazy atheist to Christian in 2017 when I'm 55 years old. And so I had 40-year gap of like paying any attention to that stuff. So a lot to catch up on and a lot to learn. And I enjoy being able to do that. I love being able to choose the founders I work with. And I combine a couple of things. I like working with founders and I want to make our city a better place. And Grand Rapids, like most Midwestern cities, has a bad history of redlining and racial segregation
Mm.
and discrimination. And we're still living with the consequences of that. The lines are gone, but the consequences are still here. And so using company building as a tool for wealth generation and all the good things that local companies do overlaps with my desire to make our city a more just and equitable and
Yeah.
thriving place. And so I concentrate on looking for Black founders to help.
Love it.
And I can do that because like it's just me. I'm just doing it
Yeah,
personally.
because you got the freedom
That's
to do
freedom.
the things
Yeah.
that you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'll touch base with you on how people can get in touch with you. I'm guessing sort of
Okay.
LinkedIn is probably the best, but I really appreciate your time and thanks for coming on, Carl.
It's been great, John. Great questions. Very fun to chat with you as always. Thanks.
Brilliant. All right. If this conversation hit home for you, and go and check out Carl's LinkedIn profile and make sure to follow his blog, Great Not Big. All the links are below, where he shares honest reflections on leadership, ownership, and building purpose-driven companies. Just a quick one. I've moved to creating, or moved to doing this podcast every 2 weeks. Some of you might know that I've taken over the helm of Small Giants. So go check out Small Giants. Links are also down there. But I've kind of moved to just doing the podcast every 2 weeks right now because there's a lot of change going on. There's a lot on the horizon. We're shifting and changing things up and integrating things. And ultimately, we'll return to a podcast a week. But right now, I'm just trying to find enough time to get everything done. On the other end, if you're really enjoying this, then please leave a review wherever you listen or watch podcasts. The more reviews we get, the more input we get back, the more we get in front of other founders, people like you, and share the message that so many of the great people who come onto this podcast are sharing. So hope you enjoyed this episode, and see you next time on the Freedom Experience.